Welcome to Star Trek Lost Stars. Here we go. Hi, my name's Tony. Welcome to Star Trek Lost Stars. Thank you for joining us if you are joining us live. Thank you for catching us on the replay if that's where you're seeing us, whether it's on YouTube, Twitch, or on Facebook. Thank you so much for joining us today. Here at Star Trek Lost Stars, if this is your first time, you're probably wondering, what is this all about? Well, this is a 4X turn-based strategy game that we and a bunch of my friends play in the Starfleet universe using the rule set of Federation and Empire as published by the Amarillo Design Bureau. And we play it online using a platform called Vassal, and we stream it live to you so that you can see and participate in the story and the role play and sort of the excitement that we're having fun with as we go. And in case you haven't seen any of the other previous live streams, we are also currently recruiting for our next campaign scheduled to start in January, approximately 2022. And we have two spots left for any potential players to join us. It's our Baker's Dozen drive to 13 with a push goal of 15. The maximum number of players that we could possibly ever get based on the number of factions that we can play in this game, is 15. We're currently looking for a confirmed 13. We might already have 13, but we still had that push room for 2. So we're looking for 2 more people potentially to participate and play in this campaign. So if that sounds like it could be you after you've watched a little bit more of this show or any of the other previous streams that we've put out, then please feel free to connect with us over at our Facebook page. I will put and pin the comments in this video on YouTube, so you can check that out. But on to today. So in today's episode, like the title says, 2 ties and a loss. You might already know where those ties and losses are happening if you caught our last live stream, but nonetheless, we are swatting bugs. We're welcoming some uninvited guests. We have a little bit of an amoeba problem, and just received it yesterday. We're going to take a look at turn 100 at a glance. So without further ado, let's get into it. So here we can see this is turn 99. So this is the turn on which our bug problem got a little worse. We had some uninvited guests show up, and of course we have the a space amoeba that is deciding to wander its way through Klingon territory. As some of the other players have said, when it rains, it pours, and boy, are the Klingons getting a lot of rain today. Excuse me. As you can see here in the sort of top section, we have the swarm. Now you can see just above it, there is this E1T. There's basically a tug, a T4, and this E1T. So a theater transport with basically no weapons and a tug. Now those 2 ships are in a space where there used to be a base station. That base station was destroyed by the swarm, and they're now moving down towards, the base station, my mistake previously, was in GG10, which is where this resource is, and I have other ships that have been moving towards the swarm to be able to engage them. So that's where that theater transport, the tug, and of course these folks here are. Now on this particular map, there's a bit of a typo. As you may have seen in our last episode, we had sent some folks, a fleet of ships to engage this swarm, and that had included a D7 and 5 E4Ms. So for those of you not familiar with the ship designations, it's basically a Klingon cruiser, the classic sort of Katinka style cruiser, and some sort of, they're not quite frigates. We call them escorts, but think of them like frigates. So frigates and a cruiser went to go say hi, and they got banged up pretty bad, and so they had to sort of retreat back to Foxtrot 9 here. So that's where those folks are. Now, what we do know is we were able to identify the swarm, identified as banshees, and as we talked about in our previous episode, those are ship equivalent of about a frigate for 1 or 2 of them, and based on the number that put us dealing with something around 16, 17 of these frigate equivalents, which is quite a lot to deal with, and that was going to be a lot to handle. On top of that, you can see that we've got the amoeba down here, which is basically it's just a counter, but it's a counter for a monster, and the counter here is representative of that sort of space amoeba that was in the Star Trek TOS episode, where it was this giant single-celled organism that was causing havoc. That's what that icon means, and basically I will share with you momentarily what we identified that monster to be. And then, of course, our uninvited guests, the Juggernaut faction, decided to pop up in India 15 here. And so anyways, they pop up, and we got to respond to them. So let's deal with it one at a time. So you can see here that there is a task group, or like a fleet of ships, including a cruiser, D7, and 5 E4Ms. And so this group of ships plus Southwest Fleet were assigned to be able to deal with the Juggernaut faction, so our uninvited guests. In addition to that, in this turn, I'm able to build a certain number of ships, and we were building another series of a cruiser, D7, and 5 E4Ms. So between that group of ships in Hotel 12, the ships that would be built from the homeworld, and Southwest Fleet, which is well, let's just take a quick look at it so you can see. No, that's reserve. Southwest Fleet. Here we are. So you can see that we have 2 D6s and a total of 20 of these E4Ms. So nothing to sneeze at for sure. And so the range of these ships is 6. So let's count this out. Southwest is down here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So basically, they can reach where the Brachy fleet is right now in case they don't move. If they were to move south, so anywhere in this series of hexes, because they typically only move 1 hex at a time, if they were to move south into this area, then we would be able to engage them with Southwest Fleet. However, if they move north for whatever reason, then we wouldn't. Anything that's built from the homeworld here, again, can only move 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So basically here, if they move into these 2 hexes, it can engage. And of course, the D7M in this group here can engage them anywhere. So the intent here is basically, 1, to identify and confirm the number of ships that are in this particular fleet that showed up, anticipating it'll probably be the same as the last time, i.e. a cruiser, a light cruiser, a destroyer, and a bunch of frigates, 3 frigates. So that was the guess, that was the assumption that was going to happen. So what's interesting is they moved into this hex right here, JJ14. And because they moved there, we weren't able to engage them with Southwest Fleet, which is the bulk or the sort of the big hammer that we were going to hit them with. And instead, we hit them with D7 and these 5 E4Ms here, and then a similar fleet from the homeworld. Now, as I shared with you in the last session where we had this engagement, we had a bit of a problem because their cruiser is what's called a mauler. It has this high-power, concentrated weapon that can take out high-value targets. So what ends up happening is that the mauler takes out the command ship every single time. And it took 2 rounds to take out both D7s. And then after that, they retreated. Now, I was able to cripple them, or cripple a number of their ships, but basically what ended up happening was they, in this encounter, they retreated back to India 15, and this is a little sort of thing that I just learned in this turn. Previously, when these fleets show up, they show up and the iconography here on the map would indicate that it's a one-way wormhole. They open like a rift, they come through it, but it's one way only. And so they're kind of stuck on the other side. In this particular encounter, what ended up happening is I engaged them, I beat them, and they retreated back to that wormhole and disappeared through it. So this is part of an ongoing discussion with the GM to be able to understand exactly the mechanics of that, because in a conventional battle, not including, if it was me in a wormhole, for example, and I was engaging with another player, if I have a battle in a hex and I retreat into a hex that has a wormhole, I can't transiting through that wormhole counts as a point of movement. And in a battle, you can have the fight, and at the end of any particular battle round, you can choose to retreat or stay and continue the battle. In this case, they chose to retreat. So totally understand, they retreat into the hex from which they came, which is where this wormhole thing is, but then they retreat through it, which is, and don't get me wrong, the Juggernaut faction can move before I do in the next turn. But what they've basically described here is that they retreated and at the same time moved out, or like retreated out of my space. So that effectively gave them two movements, if that makes any sense. So it's, according to the rules, that's not really how it's supposed to happen. However, of course, as we're playing sort of an open campaign with some house rules in the context of this game, and this is the first time that we've incorporated a faction like the Juggernaut faction in this way, and this is a faction being controlled by the GM as an NPC. It's a little sort of fuzzy. So in the context of the game master controlling an exciting element of the game, my suspension of disbelief is fully suspended, and that works. I just personally, and I imagine you might want to too, understand the exact mechanics of how they do this, because can I employ this mechanic at some point in the future using wormholes and so on? If so, that'd be great to know, and I'll find out more about that. But either way, we engaged these guys, and I call it a tie. I lost 2 ships, 2 cruisers, which are sort of expensive ships to lose, and I crippled a bunch of my frigates. Basically, I crippled half of the frigates that I had. So 5 of them got crippled. 5 were still. Actually, I think. You know what? I think I lost 5. Let's just take a quick look. I'm going to just jump real quick here to the turn 100 map, and we can see here that there are so I lost 5 frigates, crippled 5 frigates, and then lost 2 cruisers. So that was a big loss for me. Ouch. But I forced them to retreat and go back through their wormhole. So effectively, that was technically a tie, in the sense that I got the desired outcome, but I paid a heavy price for it as far as losing the number of ships that I did. So that was a huge sort of pain in my posterior. Next, let's talk about the swarm. So the swarm in the top of this map, as you can see, right up here, the swarm is surrounded by the D4E, the E2, and there are 5 E4Ms in that hex. They're just not represented on the map. I confirmed this with the GM. It was just a sort of a typo, but there's supposed to be 5 D4Ms there. Sorry, E4Ms. And then, of course, the tug and the E1T. So I engaged the swarm as a means to try and just kind of whittle them down and weaken them, because as any sort of self-replicating mechanical swarm like this, they can get out of hand really fast. And so a war of attrition, or a battle of attrition, so to speak, is probably the best way to win this. If I can go in and wipe them out in one go, great. Problem is, I just don't have the ships there to be able to do that. I could have used the D7Ms to be able to affect that. The problem is that the D7M, I needed them to be able to potentially deal with the Juggernaut fleet, because I saw them as a greater threat. For example, if they moved into, instead of going to J14, they'd gone into 15, they would have liberated that. They would have liberated that resource. They would have also moved toward my colony, and I wanted to make sure that I prevented that from happening. So I moved to them initially, tried to deal with them as a priority. Obviously, I paid a price for it. I was going to pay a price no matter what happened as far as losing capital ships. It just would have the outcome was get them out of my space, and that's the thing that I got. One important note that I learned in that encounter with the Juggernauts is that in the first encounter that I had with them, and I mentioned this in the previous live stream when we're talking about the movement of, or trying to reach out and touch the Juggernaut fleet, like why would I want to do that? And I had mentioned in that episode that I was doing that because I wanted to get sort of the R&D reward of beating them. Because when I first encountered the Juggernaut fleet and I beat them, I got a benefit from destroying them or forcing them to retreat, the engagement. I asked the GM, in this situation, I forced their retreat and they retreated through their wormhole. So would I get an R&D or a scientific benefit there? The answer was no. In that you would get the scientific benefit for the first encounter, but no subsequent encounter after. Wow. That was sort of news to me, and I didn't realize that was going to be the case. Changes the calculus now as far as, like, why did I bother pissing off the Paravians and trying to reach out and touch that Juggernaut fleet without the R&D benefit or perk? That being said, I have identified from a role-playing perspective that this is the great enemy, the Juggernaut. These are the great enemies of the Old Kings, and that it's our job as Klingons to go out and wipe them out because of the threat they represent. So that still ties in with the RP or the role-playing aspect. It's just a bummer that I don't get the R&D benefit from all these little engagements. I just pay the price in ships, and I just don't get anything for it, which kind of sucks. But I digress. Let me return to the Swarm. So with the Swarm, what we ended up doing is this was a sort of a delaying tactic, or just kind of this engagement for attrition to whittle them down over time. So I ended up attacking them with the D4E, the transport, the tug, and the 5 E4Ms, and then of course there's an E2 under that D4E as well. So what ended up happening is engage them. And as we'll see here in the next map, boop, you'll see that here we have crippled an E1T, a T4, so the tug and the theater transport. I have 3 remaining E4Ms and a D4E. So I lost 2 in the retreat. I lost 2 E4Ms and the E2, which is fine. That's fine. No big deal. But I lost those ships in the retreat. However, I substantially whittled down the Swarm, which is huge because, as was mentioned in last episode, I found out when I engaged them and identified them as banshees, which is the label for this particular monster, that one of the things that they do is they will replicate or self-replicate when they take out base stations. And so I can't allow them to get close enough to my YBS on the border and take it out, because if they do, they'll grow and get more, become more of a problem. So I just want to make sure that I prevent that from happening, and away we go. So we've done that. We've whittled them down. The indication is that they are substantially whittled down, and we'll sort that out. The last thing, so that effectively, as far as I'm concerned, is a tie. I didn't sort of win the battle in the sense that I didn't completely wipe them out. However, I did whittle them down, and if you'll notice they moved down into the next hex. I still have effectively a turn and a bit to respond to them and take them out. So I have enough room between them and me to be able to take them out before they become too much of a threat for that YBS and have that potential to replicate. So there's a really good chance I'm gonna be able to eliminate that threat. The last one is the amoeba. So this was particularly frustrating because, as you can see here, in case it wasn't clear before, the monsters will always move first. So at the beginning of the turn, it doesn't matter what any of our player initiatives are, the monsters will always go first. Okay. That just means that when I see them on the map, like you see them here, I have to assume that they're going to move, and whatever is in position is in position. There's nothing I can do about it. So we see the amoebas here. There's six different directions it can go. If it goes up and to the left, it'll be fine. It won't sort of hit anything. That's good. It can go down and to the right, and it won't hit anything. But if it goes up and to the right here, it's going to hit this base station, and all this base station has is 2 exploration ships, those exploration freighters that I had been building. And the disadvantage is that, of course, the freighters got nothing. They have no attack potential whatsoever, and the base station is what it is. Whereas this one, of course, has all these ships here. Now, these ships were involved in the Juggernaut attack, but they would have been at that base had the orb moved first, or sorry, the amoeba moved first. So the amoeba, as it turns out, went here. Of course it did. If it was going to move in any direction, and these are sort of random rolls, it's not like the game master intentionally does it. The only other contributing factor would be if the particular monster has in its description has sort of like a preference or an attraction to a specific kind of target, planets, resources, bases like the Swarm bases, then it potentially will move in that direction if it's within a range that it could quote unquote see it. So certainly this particular monster is within a range that it can see two potential bases, if that's what it wants to go after, are close. One is well defended, one is not. Okay, so it went after the one that was less well defended, even just by number of ships, right? There's 2 ships at a base versus 6 ships in a base. It makes sense. So anyways, it went to the base and it destroyed the base. The freighters provided no ability to defend it, and the YBS was absolutely wiped out. That sucks. However, the benefit is, whether it's the YBS or the sensors from the freighters, I was able to identify what this monster is. And it's monster, and I kind of let it slip before, is called an orb. What that means, I have no idea. But I pinged and or questioned the GM about what the significance of an orb is. How strong is it? What do I need to send to take it out? Sort of like the tactical analysis piece, right? At the end of the day, it's basically the equivalent or just a little bit stronger than a M-era cruiser, which explains why it was able to destroy the base station, because the base station only has a 4 attack. And of course, the exploration freighters offered no additional resistance whatsoever. So there was no added benefit, defensive benefit, that those freighters could provide. So the monster attacked. I did the best to defend it. I don't know how much damage would have or was done to the orb in this case, but without a doubt, that is a solid loss. I lost the base. So as we go into the next turn here, you can see that it destroyed that base and must have retreated out of the hex because now it's in this hex here. Good news, it's at least 2 movements or 2 turns away from popping anything else, which is good. And no matter what it hits next, whether it moves this way or that way, if it moves sort of further into the heart of Klingon territory, no matter which base it takes out, I still have supply to this area, so it'll be okay. It's just frustrating because, you know, I don't like it when they wipe out my bases. Sucks. So that's what that is looking like right now. As you can see, just as a quick sort of update on the map from the Klingon perspective, you can see again the swarm has moved down. These ships are crippled. The Amoeba popped that base and is now moving south. The Juggernaut faction is gone. On the other side of the world, so to speak, we can see that these 2 task groups are, one has successfully explored space, the other has not. It's still grayed out. And then, of course, this guy is basically, it has so many perks for exploration that every time it goes into a hex, it'll discover it. So that's good. Let's scroll down. We can see along the border here, we have repaired one of the 2 Federation ships that were here. Strange that they didn't go to the dock that is designed to repair ships, rather just the cheapo base, the YBS. It'll just take longer to repair that that destroyer if it decides to remain there. C'est la vie. As you can see along this borderline, though, we have started building a base here and started building a base here, basically mapping out a space along this border to be able to build out and have a nice, hefty and robust defensive line. As we move down here along this this borderline, this is an example of, from a player perspective, playing this game, this is an example of where sort of things can go sideways a little bit, as far as like if you're not explicit or you don't fill out the paperwork, so to speak, properly, then there can be some mistakes. You'll notice that now the name of this particular fleet has changed, and I think that's just a preference from the game master because the game master is managing that piece. So he changed the name of this particular squadron, and they were in this hex, and he moved them up there. That was because there's a dreadnought in that fleet that can only move 4 hexes, so it moved up 4 hexes. However, the rest of the ships that were in that fleet should have moved with it. I'm not clear, and I don't understand why or what the thought process was or what happened in the orders. I have to sort of touch base with the GM to figure that out, to understand what happened here and why those ships didn't move up with the rest of the fleet. They were supposed to move up to here, and then of course up to my space here. The reason why this tug, which had moved here to provide supply, was still here was that it needed to continue to provide supply to these ships so that they would move up. That was kind of the requirement. So that's why the tug is still there to facilitate all the ships moving out. And I don't know why these ships didn't move. That being said, it's not a big deal. They're still in the neutral zone. I'm not continuing. I mean, arguably the Praevians will still be pissed off about it regardless, because it's in the neutral zone and sort of well outside of Klingon territory. But it's not a big deal in the grand scheme of things. You will notice, of course, that the Praevians, when we look over here, you'll see that they're repairing those ships that were crippled from taking out the Juggernaut fleet that was in this vicinity. They moved a task group of ships to take back their resource. Interesting that they did not move to further disrupt the sort of claiming of territory that's going on here with the Federation. Very interesting. I'm surprised they didn't do that. I would have expected, quite honestly, for them to put something in here to disrupt this claiming of territory. But we'll see. Maybe that's on their docket for next turn. We'll see. But as you can see here, we've got 3 major fleets here. Let's just take a quick look at those Praevian fleets and see what's in there. So we've got the Praevian Shrike, Vulture, and Home. So bird fleets, Shrike, Vulture, and Home. Of course, they are all scattered all over the place. Let's try and organize that a little bit better. So first of all, we can see that Shrike fleet is a monster of a fleet. They've got a total of 7 of these cruisers, which is, yeah, that's a pretty significant amount of firepower. As you can see here, that's wow, that's a 56 straight. Yeah, 56 straight. Just those cruisers alone. Then he's got a total of 17 destroyers, still a light cruiser. He's got 7 frigates and the tug with the mother pod. Now, what's so interesting about that, as I just move these over my head here, is they're still sitting on top of that wormhole. This gravity well one way is still going to potentially come out here. Now, this, just a point of comparison, all they have here is Third Fleet. Now, Third Fleet's been beefed up. It has 11 light cruisers, which, to be fair, is sort of equivalent to the DDs. So 1-to-1 there. They have a total of 9 frigates. Again, equivalent here, so very similar. 7 to 9, 17 to 11. So overall, the Praevian balance in this equation is higher. They only have 3 cruisers from the Federation side. Again, 7 on the side of the Praevians. And why that's so important is because in a battle line, so for example, in this equation, assuming that it's just this fleet that goes through, both of these sides both of these cruisers, whether it's the Federation or the Praevian cruisers, they have a command factor of 8. So that means they can control 8 other ships other than the ship itself. So basically what that means is you take the number of the command rating plus 1, and that's the total number of ships in a battle line or in a group of ships that are being counted in any one particular round of battle in a battle. So he can put 7 of these things in the battle line and then fill the space of 2 more with a frigate, with 2 frigates, 2 destroyers, or whatever the case is. Why is that important? Well, he can put 56 attack right off the top with those frigates, and then add, let's say it was 2, with those cruisers, and then 2 frigates is an extra 10. So he has a total of 66 attack factors in a battle round. By comparison, thinking best case scenario here, the Federation, if we put all their light cruisers and cruisers in the first battle line, and that's all they did. So they've got a total of 21 attack factors with 3 of those cruisers. So there'd be 6 remaining ships. If they're all light cruisers, that's an extra 30. Excuse me. So that's 51 total attack factor versus the 66. It's quite a discrepancy. And that is what I would call a reasonable amount of attack factors and sort of chaff in Shrike Fleet. And that's all the good stuff in the Fed Fleet. Shrike Fleet will be able to soak up more damage and still maintain that solid 66 attack factors throughout every battle round, whereas as damage is incurred by the Federation, they will whittle down and their total potential damage that they can inflict will decrease round after round after round. So all that means is that if Shrike Fleet goes through this round, like this coming turn, and hits third, they're going to wipe them out without a doubt. And they get to move first. So they'll hit third, wipe them out, and then the question is what happens next. There's Battlefleet 4 here, which is not insignificant, but it's not big enough to make the difference. And then there's the Fed Home Fleet. Where are you here? Fed Home Fleet. And Fed Home Fleet isn't terrible, but it's not massive either. So if they were to combine these two fleets and hit whatever the Paravians sent through, there's potential that they could significantly hold off what the Paravians are doing. But there's an equally good chance, I think, that the Paravians could win that fight. And then they'd be in a position where the Feds would have essentially nothing in between them and their homeworld. I don't think that based on how... Sorry, you can't see it, of course, because my head's in the way. So between the Third Fleet here and their homeworld, there would be nothing in between there if those two fleets were wiped out, and Battlefleet 4. So I don't think that there's really enough between, like, their home system, the Federation's home system, is really well defended. If you can see this. So you see that they've got, my goodness, 12 brigades, and then four, another 12. Jeez Louise. So they've got, just from the ground bases alone, they've got 36 attack and 36 attack, and then of course they've got their YDOC, as well as what they have here at Mars. Again, 26 plus the base, and then Luna only has 20, but that's not insignificant. Depending on what the Paravians had surviving when they came through the other side, they could hit the Fed homeworld and do damage. Would that be, seismic and game changing? No, but it would be significant enough that it would really sort of change the dynamic, because the Paravians would have proven at that point that they can reach out and touch the Feds and cause real damage. Would that sort of turn things on from the Fed perspective, and they would, and I am amazed they haven't done this. Why haven't the Feds reached out and actually taken this hex to control this? I don't understand why they haven't done that. They could do it, and it makes sense for them to do it based on the sort of the tactical or strategic weakness that presents. Rather, the strategic weakness that presents, it just is a no-brainer to me. But of course, they've also got this home fleet, which is, nothing to sneeze at, but not really the thing that's going to stop the Feds, because the Feds have, in Battlefleet 1 and 2, let's see here, Battlefleets 1, Battlefleet 2. So Battlefleet 1 alone has 23 frigates. 23 frigates. Wow. That 23 frigate count is a huge amount of damage they can bring to the table. But there's only so much you can do there. Fed Second Fleet is not insignificant either. I think the big thing here is that if they start engaging in that kind of activity, they're going to whittle down their fleet quickly. They're going to start losing ships, and then the sort of the dynamic between the Feds and the Paravians is going to change, and the Feds' ability to project force beyond their border is going to be significantly impaired. And the Paravians will kind of sort of win that fight over time. But really, it seems to me at this point, if the Feds are going to continue fighting a war with the Praevians, they need to eliminate and take this location so that they don't have to worry about slipping in behind their lines and causing that issue. And or they gotta build something significant there and prevent any further incursions from the Praevians, so that it's like a doorstop and they'll never get through. With that being said, I'm just talking a lot here. Let me take a second and check the chat. I can see that Jim's piping in there. So Jim says, hi, Tony. Hey, Jim, how you doing? Hi, Paul. Charles or Chuck. Hey, Tony, the Juggos could have retrograded back through the wormhole. Yeah, so they could have retrograded if it was their attack, but I engaged them on, so they would move first. So this is a good question. So Chuck is saying that so just like me in my turn, I could spend my attack or spend my turn to attack somebody, and after I attack, I retrograde. Absolutely. Except in their case, they moved first. So they moved first into the hex, which was JJ14. I then moved to engage them, hit them. They retreated out of that hex. Retrograde at that point is mine to do, not theirs. So because it's my turn at that point. So that's the question I have. Like, how are they able to do that? I understand totally. The retrograde option is a great option, but in that particular case, it doesn't really fit. So anyways, this is just something I gotta ask the GM about and get some clarification. So yeah, that's let's one thing I didn't do when we were on the other screen, and I'll switch back right now. Let's do a walk around the park, taking a look at fleet cap and EPs. So let's start with fleet cap. You can see that the Borak continuing to grow their fleet. They're now at 93, approaching 100, which is the reason why that's significant is because, as you can see, and of course my head is right in the way. Let me switch that around. You can see that the Borak here on the map are still sort of isolated. They have nobody in their way. They have no points of contact other than with the Praevians, and of course the Praevians, really, to be fair, are offering no sort of opposition. Ooh, exciting. Okay, we'll get into that in a second. I hadn't looked at that yet. Okay, so let's just take a quick look at this fleet cap thing first, because this is going to get fun. All right, so Borak 93, Federation has a total of 153 ships. Wow, that is impressive. Klingons are at 118. Now, keeping in mind, I just lost 7 ships in a fight, so that would be significantly higher. But I'm in constant battles right now, and I'm losing stuff, which sucks. But that's why I'm at 118 as opposed to higher. I'm in a fight. The Praevians are at 94, so interesting, especially since they are at MTech 2 as opposed to not. Their MTech is significant, and they're doing really well. Yeah, they're doing well. The Romulans, well, we're going to get into them in a second. And of course, the Tholians are now at 117 ships. What's interesting about that, they're basically the same number of ships that I have, but look at the discrepancy between their total attack and defense factors. I have essentially equivalent attack and defense. I have attack factors of 443, defense 444. Now that's because I have some crippled ships, but the fleet cap of those ships is 459. They have, the Tholians by comparison, have 233. That's literally just shy of half the attack factors, and then effectively, I mean, it's a difference of 10 defense factors. It's effectively the same. Therefore, 69 to my 459 total fleet cap is effectively equivalent. So, but the Feds, look at them, 715 fleet cap. That's crazy. Interesting to note, you look at the Borak, their total fleet cap is 439 to the Klingons 459, the Praevian 449, and the Tholian 469. Why? So we're all in the same ballpark. It's really interesting to see the discrepancy between attack and defense factors, because essentially what that means is that the ships that you have in play require the same amount of support, which is the fleet cap. That's like supplies, food, fuel, whatever. The total attack factors, obviously, that's how much firepower you bring to the fight, and can be representative of your total, well, your potential in a battle, but also how many of those ships are warships or ships that you can bring to a fight. Obviously, the Borak are at 233, the Tholians also at that 233 number. So there's quite the discrepancy there, but interesting that that number is the same, and the Tholians have effectively, 24 more ships than the Borak, and the number's the same. So that shows how sort of weak from an attack factor perspective the Tholian ships are. The discrepancy, again, same idea, but you look at the Paravians versus the Borak, there's like over 110 points, approximately 109 point difference between the attack factors of the Paravians and the Borak, and yet they have the same number of ships. Very interesting. So let's not spend too much time on that. Let's take a quick look at EP. As we can see, the Borak are at a whopping 70. They are the kings of the castle right now. Batman faction's making money. Must be Bruce Wayne funding that errant empire. The Federation are at 66.5. Quite a little bit of a tumble considering they used to be the rulers of the roost. The Klingons are at a solid 68 even. The Paravians are at 55.5 after taking back their resource. And the Tholians, they are doing really well, 69.5. Just to give an indication of why that is, this planet right here, in the previous turn, you can see as I scroll, you can see that this was still an independent planet. And this turn, whoops, let's try that again. Whoop, there we go. And then this turn, it was integrated into the Tholian Empire. So basically what we have here is the Tholians are fully integrated in, or sorry, that planet is now fully integrated into the Tholian Empire. They don't have any more independent NPCs that they need to integrate. That's basically the big jump that I was expecting from their economy. It's now completely happened, and they're fully integrated. Now, Jim, Paul, Chuck, let's talk about the Romulans. So, for those of you, and before I get into this, let me digress for a second. For those of you who have joined us or are still following us at now almost the 50-minute mark in this live stream, thank you so much for staying with us, especially on the replay, if that's where you're catching us. As you know, we talked about the drive for the Baker's Dozen, so the drive for 13 players. Those players that have indicated their interest and are committed to the next campaign, we are currently integrating into this one. As mentioned in previous live streams, if you want to play with us, we're using this opportunity to make you familiar, give you the opportunity to be familiar with how we run these games, the spreadsheets, the sort of the back end stuff that we do, so that you can submit your turns and play along in the game. Make your mistakes in this, we integrate you into the game we're currently playing so that you can learn and make mistakes now, so that when we all start fresh in the new campaign in January, you're not making those mistakes then. Because, of course, you have a range of players. Some have experience doing this, some don't. And I can speak from experience. When I first played with this group, I made a ton of mistakes. Huge mistakes that nearly crippled me. It was just my particular play style that sort of compensated for that, or at least put me in a spot where I could have impact, shall we say. But since learning those lessons, you just get better and better and better by avoiding the pitfalls that would hold you back. So, in this game, right now we have a number of players equivalent to, if not more, than the current sort of major factions that you see on the map right now, or the map that I have that you see. And as we've talked about, there's these huge, vast areas of Fog of War hexes where these other newer players are playing. Currently in the chat right now, we have Chuck, Paul, and Jim, all of which are players in this campaign. So they are currently playing right now. As is early in the campaign, we don't have visibility of other players. If you go back to the first couple episodes, those streams might be a little less convenient to watch, but you'll be able to see how those maps are sort of in isolation. the Klingons for the longest time are the only empire that you see until I start bumping into other folks. We share information, we share supply, and then boom, we can see each other, right? In this case, right here on the edge of the map, we can see the Romulans. This is a minor faction that Jim, Chuck, and Paul, maybe not all of them, but some of them, have encountered the Romulans already. They may even have their maps open to the Romulans, and they've shared that at this point. Chuck saying that the Roms are not a nice person. Are you referring to me being not the nice person, or is it the Roms? We'll see. But you let me know in the chat there, Chuck. What we can see here is we have a YSN, so it's a Y era or middle era, sorry, before the middle era, an early era frigate, which is accompanying a YFES, so an exploration freighter. So they must have come out of a space like one of these hexes. If we go to the previous map and we scan over this way, we'll notice that the Paravians didn't have a ship here. So it's possible that the exploration freighter was here and moved here. And then, of course, the convoy's there. When we switch over to the other map, we can see here that the convoy is right there. They moved probably from there to here. And now they've encountered not only the CA, but the tug. And I bet you the tug is going to build a base right around here. If there is a base station if they're using a convoy like this, there's probably a base station within 2 to 3 hexes of this convoy. So that would mean that anywhere from November 25, Kilo 27, all the way down to Kilo 30 to November 31, somewhere in that ballpark, there is at least one base station that is providing supply to that convoy. I expect they probably have a supply 4 instead of 3, but if it was 3, that would be the range. And if it's me, I'm doing it every 2 hexes, so I would expect that there would be a base actually within 2 hexes of this convoy, and that this convoy may actually be being used to build a base in short order. It just depends on money. But why is this important? Why would you care if you're watching this live stream? This means that we're really close to bumping into the other players. The Romulans are bumping into the Paravians. And once we get visibility on the total Romulan, like what the Romulans look like, it's going to be really interesting. Now, here's an interesting thing to think about. So just quickly going back to the chat, Chuck says, Jim says, duplicitous Romulans. Chuck's confirming that it's the Roms that are not nice, and just that they're grumpy Vulcans. So what they're indicating here, what Chuck and Jim are saying, is that the Roms are kind of starting fights, not playing nice. They're mixing it up. So how's that going to play it with the Paravians? The Paravians are already at war with the Feds, arguably the strongest faction on the board. They're already fighting them, and now they're bumping into the Roms. I can speak from experience in the last game when I had a war going with a sort of weaker player, as far as like they were far behind me in tech. They were, they were, I was winning every fight with them, but they were continuing to antagonize me. They would not leave me alone. We would not have peace. They would just kept pushing and pushing and pushing. So I was never able to get from a war economy back to a peace economy, and it was pushing my war turns, and that was irritating. So, something to think about here. You've got the Paravians, who have been engaged in a long, drawn-out war at this point between myself for a couple turns, the Federation now for, oh my goodness, we're at turn 100, and if I think about it, I'd have to go back and check the spreadsheets, but I'm pretty sure around 92, turn 92, was when I had my initial conflict with the Paravians. So that's at least 8 turns. Even if And the feds are still trying to do that disputed territory thing, which, as you can see here, that's going to take a couple turns to sort out. So let's say we get to 10 before the disputed hex gets resolved, and then let's say they go to peace. But then at that point, the Praevians are still going to be at war potentially because the Romulans are going to pick a fight. Interesting. That means the Praevians, because it'll take them a while to get their ships over there, at least 2 turns. I don't know how big the Romulans are, but it takes 2 turns to get there. They'll be at 12 war turns, and only then will they start to be at a point where they're going to start being able to knock those down. If they get to that point, who else is going to start a fight with them? I mean, we know the Borak have been, they've been keeping their powder dry this entire time. Would they start a fight with them? Maybe. The border between them looks pretty weak. Would I want to start a fight with them? I mean, I'm certainly building up my defenses, but I mean, there's not a lot here. There's not a lot to win if I start a fight with the Praevians, to be fair. The Tholians don't seem to be wanting to do that. They're happy to do the trade, and of course, they haven't explored the hexes along this border, so there's no real reason for them to start a fight with the Praevians. But as Chuck, Jim, and Paul might say, or might know, there's more than just the Romulans over here. And those factions may decide to start stirring the pot. Maybe all the minor factions, and this is where I get excited. If all those players that are in that pocket work together and fight the Praevians, ooh, that's going to get exciting. Why is that overly exciting? At least 3 things. 1, they're going to be working together as new players against a player that's been playing this for a while. So basically one veteran player versus 3 new players. That's going to be fun to watch in itself. 2, there's a limit to how much you can build. Any one player can only build as many slipways as they have. For example, as the Praevians, we have 3 destroyer slipways, or F slipways. We have 3 frigate slipways. We have 2 cruiser slipways. The only reason I haven't built light cruiser slipways is because I don't really have a light cruiser in my build set that I can build. That's available for me to build. I could use light cruiser slipways to sort of down build destroyers, potentially, but the ROI on that isn't necessarily really, really good. So, but I've got a total, for example, in my case, I can build a total of 7 ships a turn. But I can only build 7 ships per turn. If we assume that these players have at least 5 slipways each, let's say 1 cruiser, 3 destroyers, and 3 frigate and 2 destroyer slipways each, they can produce 5 ships per turn, alternating between 5 and 4, because the cruiser, you can only build a cruiser every season. So if you have 2 cruiser slipways, you can build 1 in spring and 1 in fall, kind of thing. So if that's the case, you've got 3 potentially, let's say there's 2, you got 2 guys that can build 10 ships each versus the Praevians, who based on their build cycles, like you would look at the ships that come out, they've only got they've got 2 cruiser slipways for sure. But they likely only have 5. Let me just take a quick look at the Shrike fleet for a sec. This is my guesswork here. So I'm going to guess that they have, well, you know what? They have definitely a light cruiser slipway. So they have a light cruiser slipway, which alternates build cycles. They have at least 2 destroyer slipways. I suspect probably 3, and they might have 3 frigate slipways. So that means they most likely have, any one turn, they can build a total of 6 ships. 6 ships, maybe a 7th. So 10 to 7 ships per turn. Granted, he's got M-Tech. I'm not sure what the tech level is. I mean, obviously this is a Y ship here, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they only have Y ships, the Romulans. After all, the Praevians have Y ships that they're initially making contact with as well. So if we assume that they're equivalent tech levels, and you've got 2 or more minor factions ganging up against the Paravians. 15 builds per turn versus 7. That's going to be fun to watch. And then, of course, the role-playing aspect. How long will that coalition stay together? Will there be infighting amongst them? Will there be sort of like a power grab? Where are they located? Are they going to bump up against the Tholians? And is there going to be a fight there? Is it only going to be with the Paravians? Maybe there's somebody down here who's going to bump into the Borak. Like I say, the dynamic of maintaining an alliance like that, and then the sort of competing demands of all these different factions starting to bump up against whoever's in that pocket, that is interesting. So let's take a quick read of the comments. So Jim's saying, ha 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 ha, Romulans picking a fight. That will be hilarious. Oh my goodness, 5, LOL. We'd love that potential. I'm assuming that means that you don't have 5 slipways, or that you can build 5 ships per turn. One of the biggest early investments you can make as a player in this game is building slipways. Because when you need to have all that stuff pre-built so that when you go to war, you don't have to worry about building it. Because if you are fighting an opponent who already has either built ships or has those slipways in place, they can start outproducing you quickly. And if at the end of the day, if they can put more ships downrange, bring more firepower to every fight, they will overpower you slowly but surely. Same thing for bases. If you have bases pre-built with repair capacity already pre-positioned, you can use that to be able to sort of reduce your losses and be more cost-effective in your fights. And, of course, you need to have fleets already in position, like big fleets already in position, to project your power. You can backfill that with the new builds that you're building, but you need that initial sort of lump sum to make the push and be intimidating and sort of drive that discussion forward. If it's a diplomatic discussion that leads to war, then you need ships on the line to, practice diplomacy by other means. But if it's just a straight up war that you're doing, you still need those sharp, pointy spears ready to use, and use them with speed and agility quickly. Otherwise, you lose that advantage. That initial 2-step advantage that you might have by having ships in position already, or having the size advantage relative to the opponent, that's really important right off the bat. So, Jim's saying for sure with a big smiley face. Absolutely. Okay. So let's just do a quick recap. We've got the 2 ties and a loss when it comes to the Klingon Empire. That was, let's switch back here. So 2 ties and a loss. That was the tie of forcing, I mean, you could argue it's a victory, but forcing the Juggernauts to go back through their wormhole and go back where they came from. But I lost 7 ships, 2 cruisers in the process. That was a big loss. So that was a tie. The Swarm, I whittled them down. I don't know how big I don't know the overall number. I just know how many I destroyed. So I'll be able to figure out shortly whether that was enough. And then I've been able to identify that the orb, and that was a tie. And although I lost a base station, I was able to identify the orb and its strength. So I know without a doubt, and I will show you on the map here really quickly. I have Southwest Fleet, which is my big hammer that can hit this orb next turn and then retrograde here to protect from the swarm. Without a doubt, that's covered. The only issue and concern is this. This is where Southwest Fleet was before. It was, and now is totally undefended. Do I expect the Paravians to try and pick a fight with me right now? That's not a good idea. Like, I mean, they could certainly pick a fight with me this turn. They could start a war. However, what would they be starting the war with? They would be starting the war with the Lyran fleet here, which is okay, but they're a bunch of Y ships. And then the Borak fleet that's sitting here. Let's just take a quick look at that. So he's got 2 cruisers at 7/8. He's got a bunch of Y stuff here. Essentially, there's enough stuff there that will, if he wants to, he can pop this base. I can't stop him. However, if he were to pop this base, I still have reach to hit him. These fleets can still reach out and hit him. And he'll be starting a fight with me that he most likely won't be able to finish because he's still fighting the Feds. And he's got the Romulans that have just popped up. So assuming the Romulans are as prickly as indicated, they're going to start a fight with the Praevians most likely. 2, the Feds are continuing to fight. And if I'm sure the Feds would love me to get involved in the fight with the Praevians, and I have a massive fleet on the border here that could help contribute to Federation success. Yeah, it just doesn't make, from my perspective, I don't see that as being a good choice from the Praevian perspective. However, if we're in a nihilist mentality, as in like let everything burn, who knows? Maybe he starts it. We'll see. We'll see what happens. But either way, I've got the Southwest Fleet here who can pop this, head over here, and defend against the swarm. So I'm pretty confident about that. I've got a good build rate of things that are going to sort of head down and continue to reinforce this border with the Praevians. And as mentioned, I've got this continuing exploration activity going on here because one of the big pitfalls that you've seen with other empires here is that or other players, when they get involved in fights, they stop their exploration, and it really cuts down their ability to build their economy. And so I'd like to try and resolve that. Jim says, soon enough will be revealed, and that big discussion is coming soon. So I'm really looking forward to the big reveal of when these other players get revealed on the map. It's going to be so cool to see those guys on the map. For anyone who's watching the replay now, because of course I can see in the chat, we've got 4 folks watching on the chat, and the folks participating, of course, being Chuck, Paul, and Jim. So thank you, Chuck, Paul, and Jim, for participating and being involved in the campaign. I'm really enjoying having you guys in. But if you're watching this on the replay, do you want to see me interview and talk to Jim, Paul, Chuck, or any of the other players, because there's a couple others that aren't in the chat here right now? Would you like to see me have them come on the show and have sort of like an interview where we can talk about the map and we can go back and forth with a dialogue about what they're doing, what they're thinking, how their experience is playing the game? Would that be of interest to you? And if so, please write that down in the comments, and I'd be happy. Hopefully they would be too. We can have that discussion and do that. Maybe pre-recorded because there's a bit of a time difference between where some of these folks are. But we can certainly air or share those interviews in another way. So yeah, again, going back to the recap, 2 ties and a loss. When it rains, it pours. When it comes to the Klingon Empire, we are continuing to sort of deal with that as it comes. The Romulans are now on the map, which is so exciting. It's going to be really neat to see how that kind of opens up and the new factions that present. The Federation is continuing to sort of, I feel like the Federation is this giant that's about to be like taken down through its Achilles heel. Andre, if you're watching, Andre plays the Feds, plug that hole and or reach out and stomp and like plug that hole from both ends. Plug it from your end and get on the Praevians to stop sending ships through there. You need to sort that out ASAP. Otherwise, I really think the Praevians are going to cause you big pain. That's got to get sorted out. And then, of course, the Tholians here are just, from my perspective, they're loving life. It's a smooth sailing situation for them. They have just bumped up their economy something massive. They've grown by double digits over the past 5 or 6 turns. It's been impressive to watch. They're going to slow down obviously now, and everybody else is going to catch up. But this is kind of the statistical average that happens over time. We all sort of start to settle into around the same number or economy once we get to be a certain size. It's all about how much space do you take up and where do you go. There are some outliers, obviously, but generally speaking, we all kind of sit in the same pocket. So that's where we're at right now. It's an exciting game. Loving to see. We're just over an hour now. And I would love to hear in the comments from you what you'd love to see next. Are you excited about the new players being revealed? Would you like to see them talk about their experience on the show or on the live stream? What do you think the Klingons should do other than stomping our bug problem? Do you think we should start picking a fight with the Paravians to get their war turns carried on? Do you think we should start maybe poking the Tholians? I mean, they've been such a good partner for us, but should we start maybe stirring that pot somehow? Or are you the true duplicitous Romulan? Do you think we should sort of backstab the Federation, which is totally not my style, but do you think we should backstab the Federation and somehow take advantage of them getting stomped or tag teamed by maybe a Paravian Klingon alliance? Would that be interesting? I don't personally see that working very well, but hey, you never know. Either way, let me know in the comments. See what works well. One last read of the chat here. Jim says, "Can't wait. It'll be fun to see difference in perspective between reality and the possible foretold here." Yeah, it's going to be really neat to see how the new players integrate into interacting with the other players that you can currently see on the map, and how that's all going to play out. It's going to be so neat to see. But with that said, thank you so much for watching. If you stayed with us, please, if you can, hit the thumbs up, the like. Of course, YouTube algorithm loves that stuff. If you really enjoy this or you've been watching it this far, please consider subscribing, following us on Facebook and or Twitch. But really, the YouTube channel here is the sort of the home depot for all the content. And then, of course, if you want to reach out and play, if you want to reach out and communicate with us and you want to play this, I'll follow this up very shortly in the chat. I'll put, actually, while I'm talking, I'm going to do it right now. So here, Lost Stars. One sec. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to put this in the chat right here, right now. This is the page on Facebook where you can meet up, or where you can connect with us. Message me directly if you're interested in playing, and sort of become part of the Star Trek Lost Stars player group, family, fun time gang, whatever you want to call us. So thank you so much for joining us here today. I will see you in the next episode. Bye for now.